Chris Gonzales here, mother and son real estate, Berkshire Hathaway, Home Services. Thank you so much for watching. I want to give you guys a real life example of how a particular buyer that we were involved in a transaction, in a sale of a house, lost their deposit. Okay, I want you guys to avoid the mistakes that they made. So here we go. Number one, how to avoid losing your deposit in a transaction. First and foremost, work with a real estate professional that has experience, okay, and that you have a relationship with, that you communicate well with. You want to read reviews, okay? You want to see other people's response to how this particular agent or this team reacted to the problems that they faced in the transaction, because every transaction, guys, is not going to be super simple. There's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be parts that you have to get through, negotiate through. There's more negotiation that takes place in a real estate transaction other than the very, very beginning when you write the offer. Okay, number two, you need to work with a lender that comes highly recommended. Okay, don't just pick a lender that sells you on the interest rate over the service that they can provide you, especially in a purchase of a home. A refinance is a different story. Maybe there's not as much tension, as much pressure, as big of a timeline in a refinance. Sometimes there is, but not all the time. The majority of the time, no. You're trying to get a better payment, and if you don't get the better payment, it's not the end of the world, right? In most refinances. So in a refinance, definitely, you maybe can shop a little bit more, maybe work with more institutional type lenders. But in a purchase, guys, really consider working with a lender that comes highly recommended, either from friends or family, or especially from the real estate agent that you're working with, okay? So that's number two. That's very important. Communication is essential in a real estate transaction. So let me tell you guys the story now on this particular home that we had for sale. From the very get-go, the communication was not there with the lender. We were representing the seller. What happened was we like to communicate with the buyer's lender to make sure to do what they call a cross-qualification. We like to use a lender that we trust, that we know, that has had major success with many of our buyers and never failed any of our buyers, to check the qualifications of this other buyer that is coming to the table. Now, the issue with this particular buyer is that they wanted to go with an institutional lender like a credit union. A lot of times, guys, the credit union, they offer amazing rates. I'll throw that right out there. They're probably going to have better rates than your average lender out there. However, the service is horrible and you cannot get a hold of anybody. So while we're trying to do our due diligence on the seller side to make sure that the buyer is well qualified, that we're not going to run into issues through the escrow process, we could not get a hold of anybody and get straight answers. So what it came down to it is we had to basically go off of the information that we had when it came to working with this particular buyer. We were also a little shaky on the real estate agent because the agent seemed, based on the answers they were giving us, seemed like they didn't really know this buyer that well. Okay, they maybe just wrote up an offer. They just met them somewhere, said, "You want to write up an offer?" Okay, great. Wrote up an offer. So they didn't really know too much about this buyer. And those things are red flags. However, on this particular listing, we were on a timeline because it was an investor that we're working with. And a lot of times these investors, they are paying interest on loans that they have. Okay, so they're paying interest. There's nobody in the house. Nobody's paying rent on the house. And now they're forking out interest payments month after month to a bank, to a lender that lent them money to buy the house. So we're kind of in a tight situation here. A buyer that's willing and able, and then a seller that's ready to just unload the property. They want to sell it, right? So we move forward. What happens throughout the escrow process? We're getting communication here and there with the agent, but still not what we prefer. We still could not get a hold of the lender when we wanted to. I want to be able to, if I'm representing you, in a transaction, I want to be able to call the lender right here, right now. They pick up the phone, they tell me what's going on with the loan. What do they still need? What are they missing from the file? Those are the kinds of things, those are the people that we want to work with in a real estate transaction, not an institutional lender where you're just a number. They don't even know who you are pretty much. Yeah, you're getting probably what they claim is an amazing deal, but you can't get a hold of anybody. And now we're running into these situations where we need to close and you can't communicate well with a lender or even a real estate agent. So that being said, guys, as we proceeded in the transaction, everything seemed to be going okay. The buyer removed all contingencies. In other words, they said, we're 100%, we're all in, no turning back. They did that, right? Because the lender told them they were fine. Everything's going to be fine. The appraisal came in, no problem. The property appraised, great, check that off the list. There was nothing wrong with the property, little minor things here and there. Seller said, okay, I'll fix those little minor things, no problem, check off the list. What happens? It's time to close. Lender cannot perform, okay? They were not able to get the loan, this buyer, at the end of the day. They removed all contingencies. They said, we're all in. Buyer ends up losing their deposit. And that's horrible. That's a horrible feeling, right? We don't want that to happen. As representing the sellers, we want the transaction to go through. We want the buyer to be happy with their new home purchase. But they could not close. So what happens? Now the seller says, when the buyer says, well, we got to cancel because we can't get financing from the credit union. And this particular buyer did not want to try another lender. We were not representing the buyer. We recommended, how about this particular lender? Let's see if they can get it through. The buyer didn't want to have anything to do with that. So at the end of the day, they didn't even want to try to make it work with another lender. So the seller says, hey, I spent 30 days here with you, tied up my property. I'm paying interest over here to this other bank, and you cannot perform. I want the deposit, right? So now the buyer is in that position. They decided to go with a lender that was more institutional, that we could not communicate with. I could not just pick up the phone, dial the person and say, what's going on? We couldn't do that. And they didn't want to go with a different lender. So they ended up losing their deposit. So I share that story with you guys. It's a lesson learned. You know, don't always think that, don't go after the person that's going to give you the better rate. You know, you really, when you're purchasing a home, you want service. Okay, communication is essential. You want service. Think service over saving maybe $30 a month or something like that. Okay, because now this buyer lost thousands of dollars. Okay, because they wanted to go with the other lender. So I hope that story helped you guys. I always want to try to give some sort of value to you. Call us anytime. Okay, we want to be of service, and we know when and how to do things in order to protect our buyers and to protect our sellers. Okay, and so I leave that to you guys. Hope you're having a wonderful day. God bless you all.